cannabis and children. That's obviously an area where there's a lot of strong emotions. Some of those emotions are involved in a case of Butte County, where district attorney started a program, a child endangerment program, trying to push that throughout California. It turns out the federal government will support removal of children from a drug-endangered environment by paying $12,000 to $15,000 for each child that is rescued. And they're trying to convince the court that cannabis is a dangerous environment, and therefore, if the parents are using cannabis, you have the authority to go in there and to take the children away. So they killed this family, and the child was nursing 28 days old infant, pulled the baby off the mother's breast, and then read the allegations that she was being charged with felony cultivation and child endangerment. And this woman was screaming to give me my child back. And I was in court maybe a couple weeks ago, and the police were holding out her behavior as evidence of her being an unfit mother because she was so upset when they took her child away for 4 months. And then they did allow her to see the child once a week, and the child wanted to nurse, and they wouldn't allow the nursing because of the cannabis and mother's milk. And the child was, it was one of those bittersweet reunions where she still exists, but couldn't nurse. And so, probably the most insane torture that I could ever quite imagine. And then they filed a second case, and they're now going for permanent removal of the child from his home. So every once in a while you get an opportunity to go spend 3 days in Butte County and try to protect that relationship. I was a psychiatrist before I became involved in cannabis and child developmental issues, and then my number one love in life is how a child develops, how it's a mom at its fused with its mother, and ever so gradually it separates and individuates. And to rip a child away at 28 days in the name of its safety, it's just really pretty hard to imagine. And they brought in an expert, pediatrician, and department chairman, and this woman had never touched cannabis, didn't know what decarboxylation was, but then was testifying that alcohol could decarboxylate, that digestion could decarboxylate, that the older toddler could feed a younger child raw cannabis, and this child could end up in the ICU where they would be subjected to spinal taps and CTs and MRIs and all the horrific medical interventions required to assess a comatose child. And this pediatrician was claiming that if you eat raw cannabis, you become comatose. So obviously we had our differences of opinion about raw cannabis, and that really is my area of interest. I'm very much entranced with its power, and to the point that now it's full time for me, doing basic research, looking at genetics, genetic ratios, and this whole issue of should children have access to cannabis. It's like you can't even ask that question with a straight face if you have any idea what cannabis is about. And to me, one of the most important things that an individual can do is go to Wikipedia and spend a couple hundred hours studying cells, the different types of cells. There's probably 210 cells that pretty much create life as we know it. They fire neurons, they remodel bone, they're involved in absorption, intestinal motility, contractility, secretion of hormones, and so it's quite an amazing plant. Why would you deprive a child of something that can modulate cell physiology? I mean, that is a crime that borders on sadistic. I've published a paper on cannabis as a dietary essential. It's a substance that we do not produce. It's a substance that has innumerable actions, and those actions, at every cell that we've looked at, the cannabinoid system is involved in its regulation. So whether you are remodeling bone or firing neurons, the cannabinoid system provides feedback as to how efficient those cells are functioning. If the cells are overactive, underactive, the cannabinoid system is involved in trying to restore normal function. The exogenous cannabinoids that pretty much uniformly only come from this plant augment that system of regulation that seeks to keep cell physiology functioning optimally. And so children, I've had children who've had brain tumors, one child about age 1.5 lost the ability to walk or had started to droop. CT scan for a bride showed a massive brainstem tumor. She was helicoptered down to Oakland where a shunt was placed immediately so she wouldn't herniate her uncus through her tentorium. And within 7 days, she was on the operating table for 24 hours with a team of 3 neurosurgeons who felt that they had gotten all of the tumor, but it grew back. She went to chemotherapy, and it was a vicious tumor, so they went to 10 times lethal, which required a bone marrow transplant. Needless to say, few children survived this therapy, but none of them survived the cancer, so it's what are you going to die by? And the tumor grew back after the chemo, so she went back in for another 15 hours of surgery because it was growing around her optic nerve. Tumor grew back, so they then decided they would ship her to an adult hospital where they could employ the most potent radiation. And for 42 days, she started her day with general anesthesia and was irradiated at the maximum level possible for 42 days in a row. Yeah, and then tumor grew back again, and so they sent her home to Fort Bragg on morphine and oxygen on hospice, thinking that it would be a pretty quick course at that point. Local pediatrician put her on raw cannabis, and she's now past her 4th MRI. She's 2 years out and doing pretty well off hospice. And we asked, should kids have access to this? And the question is, why would you deprive a child of the possibility of preventing tumors? Why would you deprive a child of preventing seizures? Another child, there's a series of kids in the Bay Area that have a condition called Dravet's. It's a severe myoclonic seizure disorder of infancy, epilepsy of infancy, and they have hundreds of seizures every day. And this one patient parents could tolerate. So the father was a single parent with this child, and he just really loved this child. And he decided to look at cannabis. And, the federal patent says it's useful for epilepsy. It's in all the literature. And so he said, well, we'll see what this does. He went to a 2-to-1, twice as much CBD as THC with no benefit. Experimented, went to a 3-to-1, had a little tiny bit of benefit. Finally found a 12-to-1 and was able to reduce, 12 times as much CBD as THC in the strain. Was able to reduce the seizures to 1 seizure every 3 to 4 days. During that period previously, he would have had 1,200 to 1,600 seizures during that 4-day period. And interestingly, I presented that paper to Icarus, which is meeting in a week and a half from now, and I was denied the right to put this poster up on a poster board because it was anecdotal. I said, well, you should meet this father because he'll explain what anecdotal is. And there's 12 of these kids in the Bay Area, and I really believe that if we had cannabis in our diet, you probably would contain these symptoms before they became a problem, because a lot of them, some of them appear to stem from a febrile situation where you suddenly go into a seizure mode. Dravet's actually is a genetic disorder of the sodium channel, so that the nervous tissue is very irritable to lead to that type of seizure activity, which reinforced previous knowledge that I had that the cannabinoids not only act at the cannabinoid receptors, but they act at channels, such as the sodium channel, calcium channel, potassium channel. The cannabinoids also act at enzymes. And it's hard really to quite imagine the scope of the interface between these regulatory molecules and cell physiology, which is part of why I felt that cannabis really was a dietary essential. And yet we still face a federal government that will pay $15,000 per child that's rescued from a drug-endangered environment and ripped from their mother's breast to be put into foster care.
we know what happens in so many of those environments. I know there's got to be a lot of good that happens, but there's an awful lot of horrific things that happen in that environment. So, from my perspective, there are two types of uses of cannabinoids. The raw plant, after 34 million years of evolution, provided us with acids. THC acid, CBD acid, cannabichromic acid, cannabigerolic acid. That all of these cannabinoids are present in this form. And interesting, one paper that came out about 2 or 3 months ago showed that CBD acid will generate twice the serum level as its decarboxylated form CBD. And it's curious because CBD had been in my business card for 4 or 5 years. Was crazy about the molecule. Probably have talked about CBD here at the Hemp Fest for years on end. I finally switched my card to CBD acid because CBD really is a synthetic molecule made by humans when you decarboxylate, when you break that carboxyl acid group off of the acid. And so for 10,000 years, we have been heating this plant. And the reason that we heat it is to make it psychoactive, because if you don't heat it, it's not psychoactive. But the biggest problem with the THC is not so much the psychoactivity, but the potency. It's so potent at 10 milligrams that you don't want to do 20 milligrams, and you certainly, if you've done 30 or 40 once, you'll never do that twice. It's generally something you do in high school. You had your first brownie and you go, well, there wasn't very much in that brownie, I'll have another brownie. This is pretty weak stuff here, I better have a couple more of these brownies. And finally you get 5 or 6 inside of you, and then the first one begins to come on, and you're like, whoa, that's cool, that's really nice. And the second one, well, that's not so nice. And the third one, this is getting way out of control. Generally, one episode of overdosing on a very low dose of THC is all that it takes for a lifetime of, I don't do edibles, too hard to control, and so what that does is keep you from using what we recognize now as being a daily dose of 500, 600, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 milligrams, as opposed to the 10 that you get in a brownie. So how do we put these two together? You use the plant the way it evolved over 34 million years. You browse on the raw plant, not psychoactive. Your dose can go up to what it needs to provide control. And if you look at the animals around us, they don't sit there and munch limb after limb. They'll take a bite at sunrise, bite midday, bite in the evening. A very small amount of it goes a long way as a modulator, and you want that frequent dose because of the rapid clearance if you want optimal benefit. And a deer is smart enough to know what makes them feel good. We just have lost a lot of those abilities, and we need to be told, preferably in print, and it better be a peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled study already worth reading. All that anecdotal stuff out there. But anecdotal evidence based on observation is the basis of all science, the basis of all epigenetic knowledge inheritance. You make an observation, and then you test that observation. And if the observation that I made was, here's a child who was on a toxic substance that had been approved by the Food and Drug Administration after all of these trials and clinical trials and peer-reviewed journals and all of this excellent scientific, statistically valid research, but it failed. That's the observation. That's the observation that these 2 experimental anti-epileptics failed. The Topamax failed, the Dilantin failed, that all of it failed horribly, miserably. And here's a child who takes a non-toxic substance that probably the biggest problem is you can grow it in your backyard, and suddenly is feeling better. And for some reason, the International Cannabinoid Research Society doesn't think that's exciting enough to share it with the young pre-doc students who maybe would turn their head a little bit. So I'm thinking about going there and just presenting in the hallway. So anyways, children need cannabis more than we do. They need it daily. They need it with salads and spinach. It's non-psychoactive. It's an antioxidant. It's patented by the federal government as an antioxidant and neuroprotectant. So let's make sure the kids don't get any of that shit. Because then what would we do with the diabetic industry? What would we do with the tumors and the oncologic industry? What would we do with the 4 conditions in medicine equal the military budget? I got on a little loop there with the politic thing, and I learned a lot more than I ever wanted to know, and I can't seem to forget. But if you just deal with heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's, you exceed the military budget. We rage and rage about the military budget. Let's stop forcing ourselves to go through all of these horrific conditions, and that's another source of significant resources that could be used. Kristen's life kind of depends on cannabinoids. Our children probably only exist because of cannabinoids. And she's been doing a lot of research on cannabinoids in pregnancy and lactation. And this is an area where the National Institute of Drug Abuse throws big bucks. We will set you up with a lab assistance, technology, equipment. If you can find something wrong with this plant, we just need to document the downside. Everything's got a downside. Find it. We'll pay you for it. That type of financial incentive leads to some pretty strange scientific literature that manages to get into International Cannabis Research Society. I mean, it's fully funded by NIDA. In fact, they have lunch hour meetings where they will offer to fund your lab if you can help them find problems with cannabis, because they don't, it's really pretty upsetting. But she's probably read 100 articles on cannabis in pregnancy and lactation, and yet it just, this whole thing about children galvanizes, it's like, protect the children. It's going to cause their brains to rot. They're going to be emotionally dwarfed. It's going to cause leukemia. It's going to cause cancer. It's horrific. And this is in the latest edition of Drugs in Lactation and Pregnancy, is like this incredibly bizarre things. The conditions for which I would use cannabis to treat, they're saying it causes. And because they're peer-reviewed and double-blind and placebo-controlled, and all the numbers are right and the conclusions are accurate, they get more funding, and it goes on, and they develop a body of literature. A body of literature. That's got to be the truth. If that's not the truth, then probably 9/11's not the truth. And it all gets mixed up. Anyways, so she's trying to do a study, people that have used cannabis. She's just looking for incidents, APGAR scores, performance. She's reproducing some of the Melanie Dreher stuff. The Melanie Dreher was funded by NIDA. NIDA felt, well, if cannabis really messes up kids, let's go to Jamaica. We'll document the shit there. And so they sent this social worker down there to do some original research, and she came back and said, wow, the kids that are using cannabis are doing a little bit better than those that don't. And she was struggling with, well, maybe the parents that use cannabis, have more enriched environments, have more access to money, and she's trying to control for all these other variables that influence. But it certainly showed to the horror of the National Institute of Drug Abuse that cannabis was not causing, severe deformities and stuff. And so they cut the funding on that program. I mean, if you veer in the wrong direction with your conclusions, don't expect that check to come in the mail. I mean, we're not here to support. This is not drugs of recreation. This is drugs of abuse that we're trying to document. So I know she's going to be reaching out to the community for controls, people that do not, people that do in both pregnancy and lactation. It's going to be, she also does research design, and I certainly would hate to even begin to talk about what it is that she's trying to do, but she needs, the bigger the numbers, the more significant the findings, and she's one of those people that likes statistics, in fact wanted to get a degree in statistics, which kind of is almost, I can't quite understand that orientation, but it makes for a nice combination, because she's doing the numbers, she's crunching the numbers, and of course her paper does get accepted because hers is not anecdotal, which is a good thing. So, Kristen, trade you places. Hi.
I'm Kristen Courtney, and most of my research revolves around cannabis and breastfeeding and pregnancy. It was a very important subject to me because I control my lupus and a whole bunch of other conditions with raw cannabis juice, primarily. And I had unexpected high-risk pregnancy. I'd been told that I was sterile by 3 different doctors and failed in vitro, but a few months after juicing cannabis, I was pregnant with my daughter, Zahaya. And I was able to control my lupus the entire time in pregnancy using the non-psychoactive leaf. And I was very concerned whether cannabis actually had any kind of harm that it could cause the baby. naturally, and so I did quite a lot of research on the subject. And there's almost every modern obstetric textbook says that cannabis has unknown effects and therefore should be avoided, and that not enough studies have been done. The studies that have been done usually include tobacco or alcohol along with cannabis use, so you can't really take those results seriously. In several studies, they said that the baby's circumference of their head or their length was, they were smaller in cannabis-using mothers, but in all of the tests that were done, those mothers also used tobacco heavily. That's how they do this research on cannabis. If one mother has any kind of a problem at all and uses cannabis in conjunction with any other substance or prescription drug, they will claim that cannabis causes these problems. And my background is in experimental research design, so I'm very familiar with looking at these studies and kind of picking them apart. And first of all, there's something called validity, where your research actually tests what your research question is, and reliability, whether you can repeat the experiment under the same conditions and get the same results. And I have not found one negative study on cannabis that's both valid and reliable. So Melanie Dreher, who was one of the head researchers for NIDA, did one of the largest studies on cannabis and pregnancy in a heavy using population in Jamaica. And they found no difference between the heavy using cannabis neonates and the control group of mothers who used no cannabis. And they actually found on several dimensions that they studied that the cannabis-using mothers had healthier children who did better in school at some of the tests. They repeated the results and had the same result when the children were 5 years old and then all of her funding was cut. And a man named Peter Fried was assigned her position instead. And even in his most damning research, he says there's no conclusive evidence that cannabis causes any problems in a neonate. So I have been wanting to expand the research so that they can no longer claim there isn't enough studies done. And I've been beginning to compile evidence on our patients that have used cannabis in pregnancy and breastfeeding. And the study that I'm presenting in Germany in 2 weeks showed 41 mothers that used cannabis and 45 mothers that used and 31 that did not. And they were ranked to make sure that they had, basically, they didn't use any other prescription drugs, they didn't use nicotine, caffeine, they used nothing else other than cannabis, and that they were financially secure, they felt safe, they had a supportive partner, so that they were well-matched participants. And on all of the scales that were measured, we looked at breastfeeding, for example. The mothers who used cannabis were 8 times more likely to breastfeed for over a year. And with all the advantages that breastfeeding has, it's pretty important for the mother and the baby to be able to continue that. And it seemed that cannabis use strongly facilitated that bond. Esther Fried's research shows that if you block the cannabinoid receptors in an animal model, all of the pups, in mice pups she studied, they all got failure to thrive and would die unless they were given cannabinoids. And when they were given them, it would reverse the effect and they would recover within a week. So the highest concentration of cannabinoids in the human body is in breast milk. We also found that all of the mothers in the cannabis group had natural labor and were avoided cesarean even at different times when it was recommended to them. They tried the more natural approach. And cesareans can be damaging to the mother, hemorrhaging, and also it can delay the bond between mother and baby after birth, be harder to recover from. And then we checked a whole wide range of serious, major, and minor pregnancy complications and found that the mothers in the cannabis using group did not suffer from the complications or were quickly able to deal with or avoid them through cannabis use. So it was pretty interesting. We didn't find any major or minor health problems in any of the babies born to the heavy using cannabis group, and they all had 8 to 10 on their APGAR, which is an indication if they have any problems after birth or need to spend any time in the NICU. So I'm hoping to expand these results now, and if you know of anyone that might be interested in participating, they can call our office. Their names aren't used, they're just given a number, but the more we can come out there and go to these really professional cannabinoid organizations and medical professional organizations and show them the research, they're not going to be able to argue with the science. Although they did argue with William's Gervais paper, which was kind of strange. They will have to look at the evidence in my paper this time, and I've already presented this in Toronto, so this information is going to get out to people. Pregnancy is a difficult time for mothers, but it's also a wonderful time, and if cannabis can help control problems to make the birth experience better and the pregnancy experience better and facilitate attachment parenting, it's hard for me to see how they can justify using other drugs and in its place. I've been prescribed 43 different medications while breastfeeding and pregnant, including some Class C drugs where they say that they are potentially harmful, but better to help the mother and worry about the baby later. But it took an uphill battle to get my physicians to really understand cannabis, which they luckily do now. But it's so strange to me to have mothers say, well, I've been prescribed Darvocet or OxyContin to use every day, but my doctor says if I'm test positive for cannabis, I could have my child taken away. So hopefully the scientific evidence will change that, and women won't have to continue to make a choice between suffering and the health of their baby. So I appreciate your time. Yeah, we actually have William and I are both expert witnesses on a case in California. In Butte County, they're taking children away from parents that use cannabis, and the rate at which they're taking children away is 70% higher than the national average. And so there's a kind of a groundbreaking case right now where they're trying to say because she used cannabis, she endangered her children, and they want to take them away for good. And the federal government will pay the county where they remove children from cannabis-using parents, they'll pay them between $8 and $12 grand to use at the county's discretion. So poor counties are taking these drug-endangered children away, tying the parents up in court for 15 months, and then if they adopt them to a new family, they make big money for the county. It's really disgusting. So, and the woman in this case delivered her child at home and didn't want to vaccinate, and they used that as further evidence that she's endangered her child, and wouldn't give her child readily to the police when they took her nursing infant off her breast and was screaming and trying to get her child back, and they used that as evidence in court that she was unstable. And why would a mother not readily give her infant to the police when she was a drug-crazed marijuana fiend? So this is the kind of thing we're up against right now, and it's crazy that it's even happening in California, but hopefully we can make a change, and soon. I don't have a large enough study group on just the juicing, but interestingly enough, I know of 3 mothers, including myself, that were supposed to be infertile and juiced and got pregnant quickly after. So I'm really interested in seeing whether getting the cannabinoid levels up, which you can do much higher levels with the non-psychoactive. Yeah. You can juice the bud too, and if it's fresh, it'll be non-psychoactive. And I think that's the preferred way to use it, because then you don't have to worry about any psychoactive effect on the fetus at all, and you are able to get much higher medicinal doses. So I think juicing is definitely the way to go. It's just not always available to everyone. Yeah, it's hard to make enough for yourself with the law. I try to juice 50 leaves or a half an ounce to an ounce of bud per day.
per day.
Yeah.
Make it throughout the day.
Yeah, in divided doses, like 5 times a day. I don't always have as much as I need, but I try to get as much as possible. And that's what I'd recommend for sustaining a serious medical issue. When you're using the oils, when you're using the smoked, you're going to be masking symptoms or controlling them, which is nice if you have like nausea or anxiety, stress, which is one of the worst things in pregnancy. Those would be best to use. But if you have a serious medical condition, you're not going to be able to get your cannabinoid levels up high enough to facilitate strong healing unless you can juice. You don't want to juice if you spray anything on it at all. And you can eat the spider mites, they'll be good protein. Better than spraying something on it, because then you're counteracting, everything that's healthy about it. Yeah.
And male leaves?
Male leaves are just fine. They have the same content. Yeah. So, thanks.
Thank you.